I'm Lauren Harper, 32 years old, an Army sergeant, and a widow who just lost her husband. Returning to Pennsylvania after a voluntary deployment to escape the agony of Mark's death, I never expected to walk into a different kind of living hell. The house was freezing, colder than the winter air outside, and it reeked of death. My mother-in-law and brother-in-law had drained every cent of the death gratuity, blood money Mark left behind, to book a luxury cruise. They turned off the furnace, leaving my stepfather-in-law, Arthur, a terminally ill veteran, dying in his own filth. Crueler still, they had swapped his pain medication for tap water to save a few bucks. They thought because Mark was dead, no one would protect this useless old man. But they were wrong. They didn't know Arthur held a secret worth $3.2 million, and he had just given me the detonator to that bomb. Comment: Justice if you believe karma always arrives on time. Hit subscribe right now to witness how a soldier teaches traitors a lesson they will never forget. The windshield wipers were fighting a losing battle against the Pennsylvania snow. It was a heavy, wet slush that coated the glass, smearing the world outside into a blur of gray and white. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel of the pickup truck, my shoulders tight with a tension that had nothing to do with the driving conditions. I reached my right hand out to the passenger seat. It was a reflex, a muscle memory carved into me over 7 years of marriage. My fingers brushed the cold leather, expecting the warmth of a hand, the rough texture of a jacket sleeve. Nothing, just empty space. I snatched my hand back like I'd been burned, the grief hitting me in a fresh wave. Mark was gone. 8 months later, and my brain still hadn't rewired itself to accept the silence in the cab. That was why I had taken the voluntary deployment right after the funeral. I needed the noise, the orders, the exhaustion of the army to drown out the quiet. But now I was back. Back to the house we had bought with his parents so we could help care for Arthur. Back to the place that was supposed to be a sanctuary. I just wanted warmth. I wanted to walk into a house that smelled like pot roast or coffee, to hear the furnace humming, to sit in front of the fireplace and try to figure out how to be a widow at 32. I pulled into the driveway. The house was dark. Not the cozy kind of dark where people are sleeping, but a hollow, abandoned kind of dark. The snow on the walkway hadn't been shoveled. It was packed down into ice, meaning no one had been in or out for days. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. I stopped dead. The air inside the foyer wasn't just cool, it was biting. I exhaled, and a cloud of white mist bloomed in front of my face. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself, confused. The thermostat on the wall to my left read 50 degrees. Why would they turn the heat off in the middle of a nor'easter? Sylvia? Derek? I called out. My voice echoed, flat and unanswered. I walked into the living room, my boots leaving wet prints on the hardwood. That's when I saw it. The fireplace was cold, the grate empty. But above it, on the mantel, sat the triangular flag case, the American flag that had draped Mark's coffin. It was sitting right where I left it, but it was gray. A thick, fuzzy layer of dust coated the glass and the wood frame. My chest tightened. It hadn't just been ignored, it had been treated like a piece of old furniture, unwanted clutter gathering dust. Disrespect burned in my throat, hot and acidic. Mark had died serving this country, and his own mother couldn't be bothered to wipe the dust off his flag. Then, the smell hit me. It was faint at first, masked by the freezing cold, but as I moved toward the back hallway where Arthur's room was, it assaulted me. The thick, acrid stench of ammonia, urine, feces, and something sweeter, heavier, the smell of rotting sickness. Arthur? I pushed the door to the den open. The room was freezing. The blinds were drawn tight, making it pitch black. I fumbled for the switch, bathing the room in harsh overhead light. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. Arthur Vance, the man who had been a second father to Mark, a proud Vietnam veteran who used to carry logs on his shoulders like they were twigs, was a skeleton. He was curled into a fetal position on the hospital bed we had set up for him. The sheets were stained dark yellow and brown. He was shivering so violently, the metal frame of the bed rattled. He was lying in his own waste, I rushed to his side, dropping my bag. Arthur! Oh my God, Arthur, I'm here! His skin was paper thin and ice cold to the touch. His eyes were squeezed shut, sunken deep into his skull. He didn't seem to hear me. He was delirious, his head thrashing weakly against the soiled pillow. Mark, he rasped, his voice a dry, cracking whisper. Mark, help me. It's cold, son. The sound of my dead husband's name coming from this dying man's lips tore me apart. Arthur didn't know. In his fever, in his agony, he was calling out for the only person who had ever truly protected him. And Mark wasn't coming. I'm here, Dad. I'm here, I choked out, tears stinging my eyes. I'm going to get you warm, I promise. I stripped my heavy coat off and threw it over him, tucking it around his trembling shoulders. I needed water. I needed towels. I needed to kill whoever did this to him. I sprinted to the kitchen, my boots thudding against the linoleum. The house was so quiet, so empty. Where were they? Sylvia wouldn't leave him alone. She was obsessed with appearances. She wouldn't let the neighbors think she was neglecting her husband. I grabbed a pitcher from the counter to fill with water, and that's when I saw the refrigerator. There was a magnet holding a piece of lined notebook paper at eye level. It was a cheap, plastic magnet shaped like a banana with a goofy, grinning face. It looked ridiculous against the stainless steel. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Derek's scrawl, lazy, slanted, careless. I ripped the paper off the fridge, my hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. Lauren, if you're reading this, you're back. Good. You handle the old man. Mom and I needed a break. This last year has been a nightmare for us with all the drama around Mark, and we needed to decompress. We booked a suite on Royal Caribbean. Don't call us, the roaming charges are insane. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Keep him alive until we get back, or don't. Whatever. Derek and Mom. I stared at the note. All the drama around Mark. That's what they called my husband's death. That's what they called burying a son and a brother. Drama. A scream built up in my chest, primal and raw. They were on a cruise ship. They were drinking cocktails and eating at buffets in the tropics, soaking up the sun, while they left a cancerous war veteran to freeze to death in his own excrement in Pennsylvania. I looked at the banana magnet, grinning its stupid plastic grin at me. I looked at the words, Royal Caribbean. I crushed the paper in my fist, squeezing it until my nails dug into my palm. The sadness that had weighed me down for 8 months evaporated. In its place, something else ignited. It wasn't grief anymore. It was a cold, hard, military-grade rage. I wasn't just a widow mourning in a cold house anymore. I was a sergeant. And I had just identified the enemy. I filled a large mixing bowl with water from the kettle I'd just boiled. The tap water was freezing, and the water heater seemed to be on its last legs, struggling to push anything lukewarm through the pipes. I tested the temperature with my elbow, just like they taught us in basic first aid, just like a mother would for a baby. It had to be warm enough to cut through the chill in the room, but gentle enough for skin that looked like parchment paper. Walking back into the den, the smell hit me again, but I pushed through it. I set the bowl on the nightstand and pulled a fresh washcloth from the linen closet, one of the few things Sylvia hadn't packed or sold. It's okay, Arthur, I whispered, pulling the soiled sheets away from his shivering body. I've got you. We're going to get you clean. He was barely conscious, but as the warm, wet cloth touched his chest, his eyes fluttered open. Confusion gave way to realization, and then, instantly, to horror. He tried to pull away, to cover himself with hands that were too weak to lift. No, he groaned, a sound that came from the bottom of his throat. Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes, tracking through the gray stubble on his cheeks. Lauren, don't. Please. Not you. It broke my heart. This man had been a vibrant, strong carpenter. He had built the deck on the back of this house with his own 2 hands. He had served in Vietnam, trekking through jungles, surviving things most people couldn't imagine. And now, he was crying because his daughter-in-law had to clean him up like an infant. Shh. Hey, I soothed, keeping my voice steady and matter of fact. I didn't stop working. I knew if I hesitated, it would make it worse. It's just a body, Arthur. It's just dirt. We're getting rid of it. You're Mark's dad. That makes you my dad. And dads take care of kids, and kids take care of dads. That's the deal. He squeezed his eyes shut, turning his head to the wall, his chest heaving with silent sobs. As I worked, rinsing the cloth and wringing it out, a quote from Mother Teresa floated into my mind, something I'd read years ago and never fully understood until this exact moment in this freezing room. The most terrible poverty is loneliness and the feeling of being unloved. Arthur wasn't poor because he lacked money. He was poor because the people who were supposed to love him had treated him like garbage to be thrown out. My mind drifted back, pulled by the gravity of grief, to the day we buried Mark. It was raining that day too, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked into everything. We were at the cemetery, standing around the open grave. The honor guard was there, standing rigid and perfect in their dress blues. The bugler had just started playing taps. I was falling apart. I couldn't breathe. My knees were buckling, and I was clinging to Mark's casket like it was the only thing keeping me anchored to the earth. I was sobbing, loud, ugly, gasping sobs that I couldn't control. And then I felt a sharp pinch on my arm. "Lauren, stop it," Sylvia hissed in my ear. I looked at her through my blurred vision. She was immaculate. She was wearing a black designer dress that probably cost more than my first car, and a wide-brimmed hat meant to add drama to her silhouette. She was holding a large black umbrella, angling it not to shield me, but to keep the rain off her blowout. "You're making a scene," she whispered, her voice like venom. "Look at your face. Your mascara is running everywhere. You look like a raccoon. Pull yourself together. The photographer is trying to get a shot of the family, and you look like a mess." I stared at her, stunned. Her son was in a box 3 feet away, and she was worried about her mascara and the photo op for her Facebook page. I looked past her to Arthur. He wasn't under an umbrella. He was standing 5 feet away, completely exposed to the rain. Water was dripping off his nose, soaking his suit, plastering his white hair to his skull. He wasn't looking at the camera. He wasn't looking at Sylvia. He was staring at the flag draped over the coffin. His back was straight, despite the cancer that was already eating at his bones back then. His hand was raised in a slow, trembling salute. He stood there for the entire ceremony, shaking from the cold and the grief, honoring the boy he had raised since he was 4 years old. He didn't care about his shoes or his suit. He was losing a piece of his soul. That was the difference. Sylvia loved the attention Mark gave her. Arthur just loved Mark. "Lauren?" The weak voice pulled me back to the present. The water in the bowl was cooling. Arthur was clean now, dressed in a fresh flannel pajama top I found in the bottom of a drawer. I had wrapped him in 2 thick wool blankets. He was looking at me, his gray eyes clearer than they had been when I arrived. He looked exhausted, his face gaunt, his skin waxy. "I'm here, Arthur," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking his hand. It felt like holding a bundle of twigs. "Feeling better?" He didn't answer my question. Instead, he frowned, his brow furrowing with effort. He squeezed my hand, a grip so faint it was like a ghost's touch. "You look thin," he whispered, his voice raspy. Have you eaten, sweetheart? Mark would be so upset if he saw you this skinny." The air left my lungs. Here he was, dying, starved, dehydrated, left in a freezing house by his wife and stepson. He had just gone through the humiliation of having me bathe him. And the first coherent thought his brain could form wasn't a complaint about his pain. It wasn't a plea for water. It was worry. For me. He was worried I hadn't eaten lunch. The contrast between this dying old man and the monsters on that cruise ship was so sharp it physically hurt. Sylvia and Derek were probably gorging themselves on shrimp cocktails and steak right now, using Mark's death money, while the man who actually loved Mark was lying here, worrying about my appetite. Tears pricked my eyes again, but these weren't from grief. They were from a fierce, protective love. "I'm okay, Dad," I choked out, using the title I knew he cherished. I'll eat. But we need to get some fluids in you first. If you believe that real family isn't defined by blood, but by who stays when things get tough, please hit that like button right now. It helps share Arthur's story. And comment, real love below if you're on our side in this fight. I watched him as his eyes began to drift closed again, the exertion of speaking draining his battery. He looked peaceful for the first time since I walked in, safe in the knowledge that he wasn't alone. I sat there in the quiet, listening to the wind howl outside and the shallow rhythm of his breathing. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to let go of his hand. But as the room fell silent, a sudden harsh blue light illuminated the dark corner of the room. My phone, lying on the bedside table where I'd tossed it, lit up. It wasn't a call, it was a notification. And then another. And another. I gently let go of Arthur's hand and picked up the device. The screen glowed against my face in the darkness, cold and artificial. I unlocked it, and the icons for my banking app were sitting there, staring back at me. I took a deep breath. It was time to see exactly how much damage they had done. The blue light of the smartphone screen cut through the darkness of the den like a laser, stinging my tired eyes. I sat on the edge of Arthur's bed, the silence of the freezing house pressing in on my eardrums. Outside, the wind whipped against the siding, but inside, the only movement was the rhythmic rise and fall of the old man's chest under the pile of blankets I'd scavenged. My thumb hovered over the notification. It was from Instagram. Chloe. Chloe was Derek's girlfriend, a 24-year-old aspiring influencer who had never worked a day in her life. She was the kind of person who treated funerals like networking events and tragedies like content opportunities. I tapped the icon. The app loaded, and a photo filled the screen, so bright and colorful it looked like a hallucination compared to the gray misery of Pennsylvania in winter. It was a selfie. Chloe was beaming, her teeth blindingly white, her skin tanned a deep, unnatural bronze. She was wearing a neon pink bikini top that barely contained her chest and oversized designer sunglasses reflecting a turquoise ocean. Behind her, the unmistakable white railing of a cruise ship deck stretched out, framing a view of crystal-clear water and a distant, lush island. She was holding a tropical cocktail, something orange with a paper umbrella and a wedge of pineapple. On her other arm, draped casually as if it belonged there, was a brand-new Gucci Marmont shoulder bag. The black leather one with the gold double G hardware. I knew exactly how much that bag cost because I'd seen her drooling over it in magazines. $2,000. But it was the caption that made the bile rise in my throat. Living my absolute best life in the Bahamas. Taught Bae how to play blackjack last night, and we won big, kinda LOL. Needed this self-care trip so bad after such a toxic year. Big shout out to my brother-in-law for sponsoring this getaway from heaven. Vacation mode, Royal Caribbean, getting new Gucci. Blessed. Life insurance life, Giri thanks Mark. I stopped breathing. I read it again. Life insurance life. Thanks Mark. My hands started to tremble, a fine high-frequency vibration that rattled the phone case. She had actually tagged Mark. She had tagged my dead husband, a soldier who had died in a dusty, God-forsaken village halfway across the world, in a post about her drinking Mai Tais and buying designer purses. Sponsoring this getaway. A cold pit opened in my stomach, deeper and darker than the grief I lived with every day. I minimized Instagram and swiped over to the folder where I kept my financial apps. Before I left for my voluntary deployment, I had made a decision. A stupid, trusting, naive decision. I had added Derek as an authorized user on the main checking account, the one where Mark's SGLI, Service Members Group Life Insurance, payout had been deposited. $400,000. That money was supposed to be the safety net. It was supposed to pay for Arthur's hospice care, his medication, his funeral when the time came. It was supposed to pay off the mortgage on this house so Arthur wouldn't be homeless. I trusted Derek. He was Mark's brother. He was lazy, sure, and entitled, but I never thought he was a monster. I thought he would buy groceries. Maybe pay the electric bill. I tapped the banking app icon. The Face ID wheel spun for a second that felt like a lifetime. Authenticating. Login successful. The dashboard loaded. I stared at the numbers. I blinked, sure that my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dark. I wiped the screen with my thumb. Available balance, 1245 days. The air left the room. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. No, that wasn't possible. There was over $400,000 in there 8 months ago. I tapped transaction history. The list populated, scrolling down, down, down. It was a hemorrhage. A slaughter. Pending, Royal Caribbean in TL, 4,800 Malbis. ATM withdrawal, Nassau Casino, 500 Mois. ATM withdrawal, Nassau Casino, 500 Mois. Atlantis Resort. Casino, 10,000 Tibos. Gucci, duty free, 2,150 BORs. Carnival Spa and Salon, 850 CORs. Liquor World, 400 DRs. I scrolled back further. It wasn't just the cruise. Ford dealership, 65,000. A new truck for Derek? Nordstrom, 1,200. Apple Store, 3,000. Cash withdrawal, 5,000. They hadn't just dipped into the pot. They had drained it. They had scraped the bottom of the barrel. That money was Mark. I closed my eyes and I saw him. I saw Mark coming home from training exercises, covered in mud, exhausted, his boots worn through. I saw him signing the SGLI paperwork at the kitchen table, his face serious. "If anything happens to me, Lauren," he had said, "I want to make sure you and Dad are okay. I don't want you to worry about money." That money was his sacrifice. It was the value the government placed on his life. Every dollar in that account represented a drop of his blood, a minute of his fear, a piece of his future that he never got to live. And they were drinking it. They were wearing it as handbags. They were gambling it away on slot machines in the Bahamas. They were massaging it into their skin at a luxury spa. They were eating my husband. A sound tore out of my throat. A low, animalistic growl that I didn't recognize as my own. My vision tunneled. The white light of the phone screen blurred into a red haze. The audacity, the cruelty, the sheer unadulterated evil of hashtagging #BotC life insurance life while Arthur lay here in the dark, shivering under a coat because they were too cheap to pay the gas bill. They let Arthur sit in his own filth to save on diapers, but they dropped 10 grand at a casino in one night. The rage hit me like a physical blow, hotter and more violent than anything I'd ever felt in combat. My skin felt like it was on fire. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The only thing I could feel was the weight of the phone in my hand, the portal to their sick, twisted joy. I stood up, my knees shaking so hard I almost fell. I looked at the screen one last time, at Chloe's vacuous, smiling face, mocking everything Mark had died for. "You parasites!" I hissed through gritted teeth. I pulled my arm back and hurled the phone across the room with every ounce of strength I possessed. It flew through the dark like a missile and smashed into the drywall opposite the bed. Crack! The sound was explosive in the quiet house. The screen shattered, sending shards of glass raining down onto the floorboards, the light finally, mercifully, extinguishing into darkness. The sound of the iPhone shattering against the drywall echoed like a gunshot, a violent crack that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the room. For a split second, there was total silence. Then, the screaming started. It didn't come from me. It came from the bed. The sudden noise had startled Arthur, jerking him out of his fragile, exhausted sleep. The abrupt movement must have twisted his spine, triggering the bone cancer that had been eating away at his vertebrae for months. "Oh God, oh Jesus, make it stop!" Arthur's voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a guttural, wet shriek of pure agony. He arched his back off the mattress, his skeletal fingers clawing at the sheets, his legs kicking out in a futile attempt to run away from the pain exploding inside his own body. "Arthur, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." I scrambled over to him, panic seizing my chest. I had seen men shot. I had seen soldiers lose limbs to IEDs in the desert. I knew what pain looked like. But this was different. This was torture. His eyes were rolled back in his head, showing only the whites, and his jaw was clamped so tight I thought his teeth would shatter. "Mark, it breaks. It's breaking," he sobbed, tears streaming horizontally into his ears. "I've got you. I'm getting the medicine. Hold on, Dad. Just hold on." I spun around to the nightstand. I knew the protocol. Hospice care meant a comfort kit kept nearby for breakthrough pain. The small brown glass bottle of liquid morphine. Roxanol. It was the only thing that could touch this level of suffering. 0.5 milliliters under the tongue, every 4 hours, as needed. I grabbed the bottle sitting next to the empty water pitcher. My hands were shaking, adrenaline dumping into my system, but my training took over. Assess, execute, relieve. I gripped the cap to twist it off, bracing myself to push down and turn, anticipating the child safety locking mechanism. But the cap spun freely. There was no resistance, no click, click, click of the safety seal. It was loose. I frowned, a flicker of unease pricking at the back of my neck. Maybe Sylvia had just left it loose after the last dose. It was careless, dangerous even, but in a crisis, people made mistakes. I pulled the dropper out of the bottle. I froze. The liquid inside the glass pipette was clear. Crystal clear. Morphine sulfate isn't usually invisible. It has a slight viscosity to it, a heaviness. Sometimes it's tinted blue or red depending on the pharmacy, but even the clear stuff has a syrup-like texture. This dripped off the end of the pipette fast, like water. "Lauren, please." Arthur moaned behind me, a sound of absolute wretchedness. I brought the dropper up to my nose. I expected the medicinal, chemical bitterness of opioids. I expected the smell of a hospital. Instead, I smelled a swimming pool. Chlorine. It was the unmistakable sharp scent of treated municipal tap water. The same water that came out of the kitchen faucet downstairs. My stomach dropped so hard I felt dizzy. No. My mind rejected it. No, they wouldn't. Nobody is that evil. Not even them. I had to be sure. I had to be 100% sure before I let this reality break my sanity. I squeezed a single drop onto the tip of my finger and touched it to my tongue. Morphine is bitter. It's a taste that makes your mouth pucker, a chemical assault that lingers. I tasted nothing. Just cool, flat, chlorinated water. The bottle fell from my hand. It hit the carpet with a dull thud, not breaking, just rolling away under the bed. They had stolen his medication. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow to the gut. Sylvia and Derek. They hadn't just neglected him. They hadn't just forgotten to pick up a refill. They had deliberately emptied a bottle of Schedule II narcotics, medication that was the only barrier between a dying man and the fires of hell, and filled it with tap water. Why? To save the $50 copay? To sell the pills on the street for cruise money? Or simply because they hated him enough to let him suffer? Make it stop. Arthur whimpered, his voice growing weaker, his energy spent. He was curling into a ball again, shivering, defeated by the pain. I looked at the empty space on the nightstand where the medicine should have been. I looked at the man writhing on the bed. This was a crime scene. This wasn't just a bad family dynamic. This was torture. They had looked at this man, a man who had worked for 30 years to put a roof over their heads, a veteran who had served his country, and decided his pain was less important than their vacation. They had looked into his eyes, handed him a dropper of water, and told him it was medicine. They had gaslit a dying man while his bones were snapping from the inside out. I remembered Sylvia's voice from the last Thanksgiving dinner, shrill and self-righteous, preaching over the turkey. "Honor thy father and thy mother," she had lectured when Mark missed a Sunday call. "It's the first commandment with a promise, Lauren. You people in the military, you forget God's laws. Honor thy father." She was honoring him with water while she drank martinis on his grave. A cold, dark calm washed over me. The shaking in my hands stopped. The panic vanished. I turned back to the bed. I couldn't give him morphine. I didn't have any. But I could give him heat. I could give him presence. I climbed onto the bed, boots and all. I didn't care about the dirt. I pulled Arthur into my arms, wrapping my body around his frail frame. spooning him to share every ounce of body heat I had. I pulled the blankets up over both of us, creating a cocoon against the freezing room. "I've got you, Dad," I whispered into his ear, rocking him gently. "I'm so sorry. The medicine. We're out. But I'm here. I'm not leaving." Focus on my voice. He buried his face in my jacket, gripping my sleeve with a desperate strength. He cried, soft, broken whimpers that vibrated against my chest. I stared into the darkness of the room, my eyes wide and dry. I wasn't crying anymore. I was done crying. I visualized Sylvia's face. I visualized Derek's smirk. I visualized them laughing on that ship, clinking glasses, thinking they had gotten away with the perfect crime. They thought Mark's death had left Arthur defenseless. They thought I was just a grieving, broken widow who would roll over and clean up their mess. They forgot who I was. They forgot that before I was a wife, before I was a widow, I was a soldier. I had been trained to identify threats. I had been trained to eliminate them. I stroked Arthur's thin, white hair as his breathing finally started to hitch and slow, exhaustion overtaking the pain. "I swear to you, Arthur," I whispered into the dark, a vow made to him and to the ghost of my husband. "I swear on Mark's life. They will not get away with this. I won't just sue them. I won't just yell at them." My jaw tightened until it hurt. "I am going to destroy them. I am going to take everything they have, piece by piece, until they are left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the shame in their souls. I will be their karma." "Why?" The question formed in my mind, screaming for an answer. Why can human beings be this cruel? As if hearing my silent question, Arthur shifted in my arms. His breathing changed. He wasn't asleep. He was awake, and suddenly, strangely calm. He moved his hand, tapping weakly on my arm, signaling me to let him go. He had the answer. And it was hidden right underneath us. The room had fallen into a heavy, suffocating silence after the chaos of the last hour. The only sound was the wind rattling the loose siding outside and the hum of the old refrigerator downstairs. I was still holding Arthur, my arms cramping from maintaining the embrace that was keeping him warm, my mind racing with plans of revenge that felt too big and too violent for this small, freezing room. Then Arthur shifted. It wasn't the restless, agony-filled twitching from before. It was deliberate. He pushed against my chest, his strength surprisingly solid. I pulled back, looking at his face, expecting to see the glazed, delirious look of pain returning. But I didn't. His eyes were open, and for the first time since I'd arrived, the gray fog was gone. The pupils were sharp, focused. The yellow tint of sickness was still there, but the man behind the eyes, the sharp-witted carpenter, the sergeant who had led men through jungles, was back. It was terminal lucidity. I had heard about it from the medics in the army. The final rally. The surge of energy the brain releases right before the end, giving the dying person a moment of absolute clarity to say goodbye. Or, in Arthur's case, to issue orders. "Lauren," he said. His voice wasn't a rasp anymore. It was low, but clear. "Under the bed, by the back left post." "Arthur, you need to rest," I whispered, brushing a strand of white hair from his forehead. "Do it, soldier," he commanded. It wasn't mean. It was urgent. "There's a green metal ammo box. Pull it out, now." I hesitated for a second, then nodded. I slid off the bed, my boots hitting the cold floor. I dropped to my hands and knees, ignoring the smell of dust and sickness, and peered into the darkness under the metal bed frame. There, pushed all the way against the wall, hidden behind a stack of old National Geographic magazines and a pair of worn-out slippers, was a dull green steel box. It was a standard-issue military ammunition crate, the kind you find in surplus stores, covered in a thick layer of gray dust. I dragged it out. It was heavy, much heavier than I expected. The metal scraped loudly against the floorboards. "Sylvia always hated that box," Arthur said, a dry, humorless chuckle escaping his lips. "She called it my junk pile. She kicked it every time she vacuumed, complained that I was a hoarder. She never once tried to open it." I wiped the dust off the top with my sleeve. The latch was stiff with rust. I put my thumb under the clamp, and pushed up hard. With a screech of protesting metal, it popped open. I lifted the heavy lid. I expected to find old medals, maybe some letters from Vietnam, or perhaps a collection of coins. Instead, the box was packed tight with paper. Thick, creamy, high-quality bond paper that smelled like old libraries and ink. I reached in and pulled out the top sheaf. My eyes widened. It was a stock certificate, an original paper stock certificate from 1980. The logo at the top was a rainbow-colored apple with a bite taken out of it. Apple Computer, Inc. I dug deeper. Beneath it were more. Microsoft Corporation, 1986. Coca-Cola. Home Depot. I was a carpenter, Lauren, Arthur said, his voice steady from the bed. But I listened. I worked on houses for rich folks in Philly. I heard them talking. In the 80s, everyone said computers were a fad. Sylvia said I was throwing money down the toilet. She wanted new curtains, new cars. But every month, I took a little bit of my paycheck, and I bought paper. I looked at the number of shares on the Apple certificate. Then I did the mental math of 40 years of stock splits. 2 for 1, 7 for 1, 4 for 1. My hands started to shake again, but this time it wasn't from rage. It was from shock. Arthur, I stammered, looking up at him. Do you have any idea what this is worth? He nodded slowly. I stopped opening the statements 10 years ago when it hit $2 million. It's mostly in the reinvestment plan now. He pointed a shaky finger at a thick blue folder at the bottom of the box. Read that. That's the important one. I pulled the blue folder out. On the cover, embossed in gold letters, were the words, The Arthur Vance Revocable Living Trust. I opened it to the summary page, dated just 3 months ago. Total assets under management, $3,245 $3.2 million. I stared at the number. The zeros seemed to dance on the page. $3 million sitting in a rusty box under a bed in a house where the heat was turned off to save money. $3 million belonging to a man who was drinking tap water instead of pain medication because his wife wouldn't spend $50. She doesn't know, I whispered. It wasn't a question. She thinks I'm broke, Arthur said, a hard edge entering his voice. She thinks I only have my VA disability check. That's why she's treating me like this. That's why she left. If she knew about this box, she would be sitting in this chair right now, holding my hand, feeding me soup with a silver spoon, waiting for me to die so she could buy her yachts. He coughed, a wet rattling sound that shook his whole body, but he waved away my concern. He locked his eyes on mine. Mark knew, he said softly. The mention of my husband made my breath hitch. Mark knew. I showed him the box right before he deployed last time, Arthur said. Tears welled in his eyes. He was worried about leaving you. He was worried about money. I told him, son, if I kick the bucket or if you don't come back, this is for Lauren. He made me promise. He said, Dad, don't let Mom get it. She'll waste it. Give it to Lauren. She'll do the right thing. I pressed the folder against my chest, squeezing my eyes shut as the tears fell hot and fast. Mark. Even from the grave, he was taking care of me. He had kept this secret to protect me. This is the test, Lauren, Arthur whispered. I wanted to see. I wanted to see if they would care for me because I was a husband and a father, or if they only cared about what they could get. Well, I got my answer tonight. He gestured to the empty nightstand where the water-filled morphine bottle had been. They failed, he said simply. They failed, and they are fired. He reached out his hand. Give me the folder. Look at the back. There's a card stapled to it. I handed it to him. He flipped it over and tapped a business card. Catherine Ross, estate attorney. You need to call her, Arthur commanded. My phone is in the top drawer. It's an old flip phone, but it works. Call her. Tell her it's a code red. She knows what that means. Now? I asked. Arthur, it's 3 a.m. There's a blizzard outside. I don't have time, Lauren, he snapped, the urgency cracking his voice. I can feel it. The clock is ticking. If I die before I sign the amendment, Sylvia gets everything. The state law gives it to the spouse. She gets the $3 million. She gets the house. She gets to laugh at us forever. He gripped my wrist, his strength fading, but his will ironclad. I need to sign the new will. I need to make you the sole beneficiary and the trustee. I need to disinherit Sylvia Vance and Derek Vance completely. I want it done tonight. Before the sun comes up. I looked at him. I saw the fire in his eyes, the last stand of an old soldier who refused to let the enemy win. I nodded. I reached into the drawer and pulled out his battered old Samsung flip phone. I flipped it open, the keypad glowing green in the dark. "I'm on it, Dad," I said. I dialed the number on the card. As the line began to ring, I looked at the ammo box full of millions, then at the freezing room, and finally at the man who had played the long game and won. "Hello?" A groggy, irritated female voice answered on the third ring. "Ms. Ross," I said, my voice steel. "This is Lauren Harper, Sergeant Lauren Harper. I'm calling for Arthur Vance. He says it's a code red." There was a pause on the other end. Then, the rustling of sheets and a sudden shift in tone. "I'm putting my boots on," Catherine Ross said. "Keep him alive. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Headlights cut through the swirling snow outside the window, sweeping across the dark walls of the den like searchlights. A moment later, the heavy thud of a car door slamming shut echoed through the freezing house. Catherine Ross didn't knock. She had a key Arthur had given her years ago. She stomped the snow off her LL Bean boots in the hallway and marched into the room, bringing a gust of cold air with her. She was exactly as Arthur had described. A woman in her 50s with steel gray hair cut into a sharp bob, wearing a wool coat that looked like it could stop a bullet. She didn't look like a lawyer who chased ambulances. She looked like a lawyer who buried bodies. She took one look at Arthur, shivering under the pile of coats, and then at the visible breath puffing from my mouth. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't say a word. She just opened her leather briefcase on the bedside table, moving the empty water pitcher aside with a clatter. "I need light," she said, her voice raspy from sleep but completely professional. I grabbed the lamp from the living room and plugged it in. Catherine set up her smartphone on a small tripod she pulled from her bag. "We're doing a video affidavit," she stated, adjusting the angle. "If we just sign papers, Sylvia will claim he was coerced or delirious. We need video proof that he is sound of mind. We need to make this bulletproof." She hit record. Arthur rallied. It was incredible to watch. He sat up straighter, smoothing his flannel pajamas. He looked into the lens with the intensity of a commander briefing his troops. "State your full name and the date," Catherine commanded. "Arthur James Vance, November 24th. Do you understand the document you are about to sign?" "I do," Arthur said, his voice firm. "It is an amendment to my revocable living trust. I am removing Sylvia Vance and Derek Vance as beneficiaries. I am naming Lauren Harper as the sole trustee and beneficiary of all my assets, including the investment accounts and this property. Are you doing this under duress?" Arthur looked away from the camera and looked at me. His eyes softened. "No. I'm doing this because she is the only one who stayed." Catherine nodded. She placed the document on a clipboard and held it steady for him. Arthur's hand shook, but he gripped the pen like a weapon. He signed his name, Arthur J. Vance. Catherine pulled a heavy metal stamp from her bag. She pressed it down on the paper next to his signature. K. Thunk. The sound was heavy, final, and satisfying. It sounded like a gavel falling in a courtroom. It sounded like justice. "It's done," Catherine said, packing up her gear with efficient speed. "The trust is amended. As of this second, Sylvia has no claim to the money. The house is yours. The stocks are yours." She paused at the door, buttoning her coat. She looked at the empty morphine bottle I'd left on the nightstand. She picked it up, sniffed it, and her face twisted in disgust. "Keep that bottle," she said darkly. "That's not probate court, Lauren. That's criminal court. I'll see you when the snow clears." And then she was gone, the taillights of her Subaru Outback fading into the blizzard. We were alone again. But the dynamic had shifted. The air in the room didn't feel heavy with despair anymore. It felt electric. We had the shield. Now, we needed the sword. I looked at Arthur. He was fading again, the burst of energy from the signing draining away. But he pointed a trembling finger at his old flip phone on the table. Get them, he whispered. I picked up the phone, but I didn't use his. I pulled out my own iPad from my bag, the only device I hadn't smashed against the wall. I needed high-definition video. I needed to see their faces. In the Army, we called this PSYOPs, psychological operations. You use the enemy's arrogance against them. You make them feel safe, superior, so they drop their guard and reveal their positions. I sat in the corner of the room, angling the iPad so the background was just darkness. I pulled down the control center and tapped the screen record button. A tiny red dot appeared in the top corner. I opened FaceTime and dialed Sylvia. It rang for a long time. Ring, ring, ring. Then a blast of noise assaulted the quiet room. Steel drums, laughter, the clinking of glass. Sylvia's face filled the screen. She was flushed, sweaty, and her eyeliner was smeared. She was wearing a tropical print dress that was too tight, and she was holding a drink that looked like a fishbowl. "What?" she screamed over the music, barely looking at the camera. "Lauren, are you crazy? It's 3 a.m. there. You better not be calling to whine about the heat." I let my shoulders slump. I made my eyes wide. I pitched my voice up, making it sound thin and panicked. "Mom, please," I stammered. "It's Arthur. He's hurting really bad. He's screaming, Mom. I don't know what to do." Sylvia rolled her eyes, taking a slurping sip of her drink. "He's always hurting. He's dying, Lauren. That's what happens. Put some earplugs in." "I gave him the medicine," I cried, letting a tear slip out. It wasn't hard, I just had to channel the rage. "I gave him the stuff in the dropper, but it's not working. It's not doing anything. I think the bottle is bad. I think I need to call 911. I need to get an ambulance." "No!" The reaction was instant. Sylvia practically lunged at the phone. "Do not call an ambulance. Do you have any idea how much that costs? We are not paying for an ambulance ride just so they can tell him he's dying." Then the screen shifted. Chloe pushed her way into the frame. She looked even worse than Sylvia, glassy-eyed and swaying. She was wearing a tiara that said, "Cruise Queen." "Oh my God, stop being such a drama queen," Chloe slurred, grabbing the phone from Sylvia. "The medicine isn't bad, you idiot." I held my breath. "Then why isn't it working, Chloe? He's in agony. It's like I'm giving him water." Chloe laughed, a cruel, hiccuping laugh. "Well, duh," she smirked. "That stuff is like $50 a copay." And Derek needed cash for the casino deposit. So we, stretched it. "Stretched it," I repeated, making sure the microphone caught every syllable. "We watered it down, okay?" Chloe snapped, annoyed that I was ruining her vibe. "We dumped it and filled it with tap water. It's the placebo effect. If he thinks it's medicine, he'll feel better. Just tell him to man up and stop ruining our vacation. God, you're so annoying." She looked at someone off-screen. "Derek, your sister-in-law's crying about the water medicine." Derek's voice drifted from the background, dismissive and distant. "Hang up on her. I'm winning." I stared at the screen. I looked at Chloe's smug, vacuous face. I looked at Sylvia, who was busy ordering another round of drinks from a waiter behind her. They had confessed. They had admitted to grand larceny, elder abuse, and medical tampering, and they had done it while wearing a plastic tiara. The red dot in the corner of my iPad blinked steadily. Recording, recording, recording. I sat up straight. I wiped the fake tear from my cheek. The panic vanished from my face, replaced by the cold, hard stare of a soldier who had just acquired the target. "Thanks, Chloe," I said. My voice dropped an octave. It was flat, calm, and dangerous. Chloe blinked, confused by the sudden change in my tone. "What?" "That's all I needed," I said. "Enjoy the cruise. It's going to be the last vacation you ever take." I didn't wait for her response. I tapped the red button. Stop recording. Video saved to photos. The connection cut. The room went silent again. The trap had snapped shut. If you would have recorded that call to expose them, hit the like button right now. And comment guilty below if you are ready to see them pay for what they did. I looked over at the bed. Arthur was watching me. He had heard everything. He didn't look sad anymore. He looked satisfied. "Did you get it?" he whispered. "I got it, Dad," I said, walking over to him. "We have them." He let out a long, slow breath, his eyes drifting toward the window, where the first hint of gray light was starting to touch the snow. "Good," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Good. Now." "I'm tired, Lauren. I'm really tired." The blizzard outside had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt heavy. Inside the house, the air was still frigid, but the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't just a cold house anymore. It was a waiting room for the inevitable. Arthur was awake, but barely. The burst of energy he'd found to sign the trust documents had burned through his reserves like a flare, leaving him dim and flickering. "Hungry," he whispered, licking dry, cracked lips. I went to the kitchen. The cupboards were bare. Sylvia and Derek had cleared out anything of value or substance before they left. No pasta, no soup, not even a box of crackers. But in the back of the pantry, hidden behind a box of stale tea bags, I found a single can of Del Monte, sliced peaches in heavy syrup. I opened it, the metallic click-pop of the tab echoing in the empty kitchen. I didn't have a bowl, so I just grabbed a spoon and took the can back to the den. I sat on the edge of the bed and fed him, one slice at a time. The syrup dripped from the spoon, gold and sweet. "Peach cobbler," Arthur murmured, his eyes closing in pleasure as he swallowed. Just like the one you made for 4th of July." It was just cold canned peaches, but I smiled, blinking back tears. "Yeah, Dad, it's my special recipe." He ate 3 slices, then turned his head away. He was done. He looked at the ceiling, his gaze unfocused, drifting through time. "I taught him to ride, you know," he whispered. "Who?" I asked softly, wiping his chin. "Mark. He was 6. Sylvia was screaming, said he'd break his neck. I took the training wheels off." A faint, ghostly smile touched his lips. He fell, scraped his knee to the bone. Blood everywhere. He didn't cry. He just looked at me and said, "Put me back on, Dad." Arthur turned his head to look at me, his gray eyes swimming with liquid light. He was stubborn. "Just like you. That's why he loved you, Lauren. You don't stay down." "Neither do you," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm tired, sweetheart," he sighed, the air rattling in his chest. I think I'm ready to get off the bike now." I nodded, squeezing his hand. "It's okay. You can let go. Mark is waiting." The change happened around 3 a.m. The rhythm of his breathing shifted. It became the sound every soldier and every nurse knows. The Cheney-Stokes respiration. Long, deep breaths followed by terrifying pauses of silence. Inhale, exhale, silence, silence, inhale. I didn't call 911. I didn't panic. I just climbed onto the bed next to him, sitting cross-legged, holding his hand in both of mine. The room was freezing, but I felt a strange warmth radiating from him, as if his soul was burning bright one last time before leaving. I started to hum. My voice was shaky at first, but it found its strength in the dark. "Amazing grace. How sweet the sound. That saved a wretch like me." I sang the song he had requested for his funeral years ago, back when we joked about death over Sunday dinners. I sang it to drown out the wind. I sang it to guide him home. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Arthur took one last, long breath. It shuddered through his frame, a final release of pain and burden. And then, he didn't breathe in again. The silence that followed was deafening. It was louder than the storm, louder than the screaming in my head earlier. It was the absolute, final silence of a life completed. I waited for a minute, then 2. I reached out and gently closed his eyes. They were no longer gray. They were just empty. The man who had raised my husband, the man who had saved my future tonight, was gone. I didn't scream. I didn't wail. The grief was there, a crushing weight in my chest, but it was solid and hard like a stone. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart, not yet. I stood up. I kissed his forehead. It was already cooling. "Goodbye, Dad," I whispered. Then I went to my duffel bag in the hallway. I unzipped it. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was my dress blues, the Army service uniform. I had brought it because I had planned to visit Mark's grave on Veterans Day. Now it would serve a different purpose. I stripped off my civilian clothes, the jeans and sweater that smelled of travel and stress. I put on the crisp white shirt. I buttoned the dark blue jacket. I adjusted the gold stripe on the trousers. I pinned my ribbons to my chest. I tied my hair back into a tight regulation bun. I looked in the mirror. I didn't see a grieving widow. I saw a sergeant. I saw a soldier preparing for war. I walked back into the den. I stood at the foot of the bed, my spine rigid, my heels together. I raised my right hand in a slow, sharp salute. I held it for a long count of 3, staring at the form under the blanket. "Mission accomplished, sir," I said into the quiet room. "You are relieved of duty. I have the watch." I dropped my hand. Then I picked up the phone and called the funeral home. Mr. Henderson arrived an hour later, just as the sun was bleeding a pale, bruised purple over the snow-covered horizon. He came with 2 assistants and a gurney. They were respectful, silent, moving with the practiced grace of men who deal with death daily. As they strapped Arthur onto the gurney and covered him with a velvet quilt, Mr. Henderson turned to me, holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Harper," he said softly, "I assume Mrs. Vance, Sylvia, will want to arrange a viewing, a service at the chapel? We usually do a 3-day wake for veterans." I looked at him. I was standing by the fireplace, the gold buttons of my uniform catching the early light. "No," I said. Mr. Henderson blinked. "I'm sorry?" "No viewing, no wake, no funeral service," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "I am the executor and the sole next of kin, as per the medical directive and the trust signed this morning." I handed him the paperwork Catherine had left. "I want a direct cremation," I instructed. "Immediately. I want his ashes in an urn, and I want them returned to me by Thursday." "But the rest of the family," he hesitated. "Mrs. Vance might want to say goodbye." I looked at the empty spot on the floor where I had found Arthur lying in his own waste just hours ago. "Mrs. Vance had months to say goodbye," I said coldly. "She chose a cruise instead. She doesn't get to come back here and cry over a casket she didn't pay for. She doesn't get to perform her grief for the neighbors." Mr. Henderson looked at my uniform, then at the steel in my eyes. He nodded slowly. "Understood, Sergeant. We will take care of him." They wheeled Arthur out into the cold morning air. The front door clicked shut. I was alone in the house. I didn't change out of my uniform. I walked into the living room and sat down in the armchair facing the front door. The house was theirs, legally. But the home was gone. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Thanksgiving was in 2 days. They would be coming back then, tan and happy, expecting to find a dead old man and a submissive daughter-in-law waiting to clean up their mess. I crossed my legs, smoothing the crease of my trousers. Let them come. I wasn't going anywhere. The dining room table was set for Thanksgiving, but there was no turkey. There was no stuffing, no cranberry sauce, no pumpkin pie cooling on the sideboard. The air didn't smell like sage and roasted meat. It smelled of lemon polish and cold, hard justice. I sat at the head of the table, my back rigid against the high-backed oak chair. I was wearing my dress blues, the gold stripes on the trousers catching the dull winter light filtering through the sheer curtains. My ribbons were perfectly aligned on my chest, a colorful testament to discipline and service. In the center of the table, on the lace runner Sylvia loved so much, sat 2 objects. On the left was a heavy bronze urn, sealed tight. Arthur. On the right was Mark's Sig Sauer P320 service pistol. The magazine was removed, the slide was locked back, and the chamber was empty. It wasn't there to be used. It was there to make a statement. It represented the protection they had lost. To my right sat Catherine Ross, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, her briefcase open, a stack of documents arranged with surgical precision in front of her. We waited. At 1:15 p.m., a taxi van pulled into the driveway. Car doors slammed. Laughter drifted through the window. Loud, raucous, vacation laughter. I'm just saying, if the old man is dead, we can finally turn that den into a media room. I heard Derek's voice, followed by Chloe's giggle. The front door burst open. A gust of wind blew in, carrying with it the smell of stale airplane air and coconut sunscreen. "Honey, we're home!" Sylvia hollered, dropping her bags in the foyer. "God, it's freezing in here. Lauren, did you forget to pay the gas bill? And where's the turkey? I'm starving." They spilled into the dining room, a chaotic whirlwind of peeling sunburns, duty-free liquor bags, and shopping sacks from a Black Friday presale. They looked ridiculous, wearing shorts and flip-flops in Pennsylvania November, shivering but trying to look tan and wealthy. They stopped dead when they saw us. Sylvia froze, her eyes darting from my uniform to the lawyer and finally resting on the urn in the center of the table. "What is this?" she asked, her voice losing its fake cheeriness. "Why are you playing dress-up? And who is she?" "This is Catherine Ross, Arthur's attorney," I said, my voice calm and commanding. "And that," I pointed to the urn, "is your husband." Sylvia blinked. She looked at the urn, then shrugged, dropping into a chair. "So, he finally let go." "Well, God rest his soul. It's for the best. He was suffering." She looked around. "Is that why there's no food? Seriously, Lauren, you couldn't throw a ham in the oven?" Chloe and Derek sat down, looking bored. Derek reached for an apple from the fruit bowl, ignoring the urn of the man who raised him. "We need to discuss the estate," Catherine said, cutting through the silence. "Mr. Vance left specific instructions to have this meeting immediately upon your return." Sylvia perked up. Greed instantly replaced indifference. "Estate? You mean the insurance? Did the VA send a check?" Catherine adjusted her glasses. "I am referring to Mr. Vance's investment portfolio, the Arthur Vance Revocable Living Trust." Sylvia frowned. "Portfolio? Arthur didn't have a portfolio. He had a toolbox and a bad back." Catherine picked up a document. Mr. Vance was an early investor in Apple, Microsoft, and several other blue-chip stocks starting in 1980. He reinvested all dividends for 40 years. She paused for effect. "The current value of the trust is $3,240,000. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the wind outside. Sylvia's mouth fell open. Her eyes bulged. Derek dropped the apple. Chloe actually gasped, sitting up straight. "3 million," Sylvia whispered. Then a scream of pure, unadulterated joy ripped out of her throat. "I knew it! I knew that cheap old bastard was holding out on me." She jumped up, grabbing Derek's shoulders. "We're rich! Derek, baby, we are rich! We can buy the beach house. We can buy the boat." She turned to me, her face flushed with victory. "See, Lauren? I told you sticking around paid off. $3 million. She reached for the stack of papers in front of Catherine. "Give me the checkbook. I need to transfer this before the banks close." "Sit down, Mrs. Vance," Catherine said. Her voice was like a whip crack. Sylvia paused. "Excuse me?" "I haven't finished reading the disposition of assets," Catherine said coldly. "What is there to read?" Sylvia laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "I'm his wife. It's community property. It's mine." "Not in a living trust," Catherine corrected. "The assets in the trust bypass probate. They belong to the designated beneficiary." She looked down at the paper. "The sole beneficiary of the trust, including the cash, the stocks, and this real estate, is Lauren Harper." The room seemed to tilt. Sylvia's smile froze, then slowly disintegrated into a mask of confusion and horror. "What?" she whispered. "Mrs. Vance, Derek, Chloe, your portion of the estate is 0. Catherine continued, reading from the amendment Arthur had signed in the dark. "Furthermore, you are hereby served with an eviction notice. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." "You lying bitch!" Sylvia lunged across the table. Her face was twisted into a demonic snarl. "You forged it! You manipulated him! He was senile! I'll sue you! I'll take you to court and bury you. She reached for me, her claw-like nails aiming for my face. I didn't flinch. I just looked down at the pistol on the table. Sylvia followed my gaze. She stopped, panting, her chest heaving. The sight of the gun, Mark's gun, checked her violence. "This isn't over," she hissed, backing away. "This is a civil matter. I'll get a lawyer. I'll prove he was incompetent. You won't see a dime." "You're right, Sylvia," I said, standing up slowly. I picked up my iPad from the table. "The money is a civil matter." I swiped the screen. "But this," I said, holding the device up, "is a criminal matter." I pressed play. I turned the volume all the way up. The sound of steel drums and laughter filled the quiet dining room. And then, Chloe's voice, loud and clear, slurring with alcohol and arrogance. "We watered it down, okay? We dumped it and filled it with tap water. Just tell him to man up." Sylvia's face went white. Not pale. White. Like a sheet. Like death. Chloe let out a strangled squeak, covering her mouth with her hands. Derek looked like he was going to vomit. "That's..." Sylvia stammered, her voice shaking. "That's out of context. That's a joke. We were joking." "Elder abuse is not a joke," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Medical tampering is not a joke. Grand larceny, stealing the SGLI money, is not a joke. And neither is manslaughter." I leaned over the table, looking deep into her terrified eyes. "You killed him, Sylvia. You took away his pain relief and let his heart give out from the shock of the agony. That's homicide." "No," she whispered, backing into the sideboard. "No, we didn't. You can't prove." Whoop whoop. The sound came from the driveway, short, sharp, and undeniable. Blue and red lights flashed through the sheer curtains, painting the dining room walls in the colors of the police. "I didn't just call a lawyer, Sylvia," I said, picking up the urn and holding it close to my chest like a shield. "I called the district attorney." Heavy footsteps pounded on the porch. The front door, which they had left open in their excitement, framed 2 uniformed officers and a detective. "Sylvia Vance?" the detective asked, stepping into the room. He held up a pair of handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." I looked at them. The sunburned, terrified family who had gone on a cruise to celebrate my husband's death. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said. The metallic click, click, click of the handcuffs tightening around Sylvia's wrists was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was better than music. It was the sound of consequences finally catching up to a woman who thought she could outrun them forever. "Ow! You're hurting me! Do you know who I am?" Sylvia shrieked, twisting her body as the officer spun her around to face the wall. Her tropical dress was wrinkled, and her fake tan looked orange and patchy under the harsh dining room lights. "I am a grieving widow. My husband just died. You can't arrest a widow on Thanksgiving." "You're being arrested for elder abuse resulting in death, grand larceny, and tampering with a scheduled narcotic," the detective recited, his voice bored and practiced. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." "Lauren!" Sylvia screamed, her head snapping toward me. Her eyes were wild, bulging with a mix of terror and narcissistic rage. Tell them to stop. I'm your mother-in-law. I birthed Mark. I raised the man you married. How dare you? How dare you call the cops on family?" She was playing the only card she had left, the biology card. She thought that because she had given birth to Mark 30 years ago, she had a free pass to murder his father today. I walked closer to her. I didn't yell. I didn't lose my temper. I just looked at her with the same detached clinical interest one might have for a specimen in a jar. "You gave birth to Mark," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterics. "That's biology. But Arthur raised him. Arthur loved him. And you killed Arthur." "I didn't kill him," she spat, spittle flying from her lips. "He was sick. He was going to die anyway." "You swapped his pain medication for tap water," I said. "You tortured him to save $50. That's not sick, Sylvia. That's evil. And now you're going to die in prison. Mark would be ashamed to share DNA with you." Her face crumbled. For the first time, the reality hit her. She wasn't going to the beach house. She wasn't going to the mall. She was going to a cell. She let out a wail that sounded like a siren, her knees buckling as the officer dragged her toward the door. That left the lovebirds. Derek was standing by the sideboard, his face pale green. He looked like a child who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar, except the cookie jar was a $3 million trust fund. He looked at the officer approaching him, then he looked at Chloe. "Babe," he stammered, reaching out a trembling hand toward her. "Babe, tell them. Tell them I just did what Mom said. We were just borrowing the money, right?" Chloe took a step back. Her eyes darted between Derek, the handcuffs, and the grim-faced detective. You could practically see the gears turning in her head. She was calculating the ROI, return on investment, of this relationship. The stock had just crashed to zero. "Don't touch me," Chloe said. Her voice wasn't slurred anymore. It was sharp and sober. "Chloe?" Derek blinked, confused. "What are you doing? We need to call a lawyer together." "We?" Chloe let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "There is no we, Derek. You told me you were rich. You told me the insurance money was yours. You lied to me." She turned to the detective, her hands raised in a gesture of innocence. "Officer, I didn't know anything about the medicine. I swear, I just went on the trip because they invited me. I'm a victim here, too. He manipulated me." "Chloe!" Derek gasped, the betrayal hitting him harder than the handcuffs. "You were the one who poured the water in the bottle. You made the joke about the placebo effect." "Liar!" Chloe shrieked. She stepped forward and slapped Derek across the face. Smack. It was a solid hit. Derek's head snapped back. "You are a broke, pathetic loser," she yelled, grabbing her Gucci bag, the one bought with Mark's blood money, and clutching it tight. "I am breaking up with you. Don't call me. Don't write me from jail. We are done." She pivoted on her heel and marched toward the door, pushing past the officers. "I'm leaving. I'm not an accessory. I'm single." And just like that, the love of his life was gone, scurrying away like a rat fleeing a sinking ship, taking her stolen handbag with her. Derek stood there, his cheek red from the slap, his wrists being pulled behind his back by the second officer. The arrogance he had worn an hour ago, when he was joking about turning Arthur's death room into a media center, had evaporated. He was stripped bare. He was nothing but a 30-year-old man-child who had never stood on his own 2 feet. The officer shoved him forward. As he passed me, his legs gave out. He dropped to his knees right in front of me. The hardwood floor cracked under the impact. He looked up at me. His eyes were wet, his nose running. He looked pathetic. He looked exactly like the little brother Mark used to complain about, the one who always broke things and expected everyone else to fix them. "Lauren, please," he sobbed, the snot running down onto his lip. "Please, don't let them take me. I'm scared. I can't go to jail. I'm not like you. I'm not tough." I looked down at him. I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a vast, empty disgust. "You should have thought about that before you stole $400,000, I said. He shuffled forward on his knees, trying to grab the hem of my trousers, but the officer yanked him back. Cherry, he stammered, using the nickname Mark used to call me because I blushed easily. He was trying to manipulate me. He was trying to summon the ghost of his brother to save him. "Do it for Mark, please." Mark loved me. He wouldn't want his little brother to go to prison. He wouldn't want me to be homeless. "Lauren, please." For Mark. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I crouched down. I got right in his face, so close he could see the reflection of his own pathetic fear in my eyes. "Don't you ever say his name again," I whispered. My voice was low, terrifyingly calm. "You stole his death gratuity. You let his father die in agony while you gambled. You dishonored everything he stood for." I stood up, towering over him in my dress blues, looking like the judgment day he never believed would come. "You're right, Derek. Mark wouldn't want you to be homeless," I said. "And you won't be. You're going to have a roof over your head, 3 meals a day, and a metal toilet for the next 10 to 15 years. I looked at the officer. "Get him out of my house." "Lauren, no, Mark would save me, Derek screamed as they hauled him up and dragged him toward the door. If Mark were alive, I called after him, my voice ringing with finality. He would be the one putting the cuffs on you. The door slammed shut. The screaming stopped. The house was silent. The dining room was empty, save for the scattered shopping bags of cheap souvenirs and the urn on the table. The parasites were gone. The infection had been cut out. I looked at the chaos they had left behind. The overturned chair, the muddy footprints, the spilled fruit. It was a mess. But for the first time in 8 months, the air in the house didn't smell like rot. It smelled clean. It smelled like winter. It smelled like freedom. The blizzard had finally broken. I stepped out onto the front porch, squinting against the blinding brilliance of the morning sun reflecting off 2 feet of fresh, pristine snow. The world was quiet, save for the distant rhythmic scraping of a county plow truck clearing the main road down the hill. The air was crisp and clean, sharp enough to freeze the inside of your nose, but it felt good. It felt like the first real breath I had taken in 8 months. I had packed my life into the back of my Ford F-150 in less than an hour. I didn't take much. My duffel bag, my uniform, a few photos of Mark, and the bronze urn containing Arthur's ashes, which was now buckled securely into the passenger seat. The house behind me, the Victorian farmhouse that Sylvia had prized so much, the place where Arthur had withered away in the dark, was no longer a home. It was just a structure. A shell of wood and siding that belonged to the trust, a financial asset to be liquidated. I had already called a real estate agent. It would be on the market by Monday. I walked down the driveway, my boots crunching satisfyingly in the packed snow. At the bottom of the drive, a sheriff's transport van was idling, its exhaust pumping white clouds into the blue sky. The roads had been impassable during the height of the storm last night, so the officers had to wait for the plows before they could move Sylvia and Derek to the county lockup. They were bringing them out now. Sylvia came first, flanked by a female deputy. She wasn't screaming anymore. The fight had drained out of her, leaving her looking old and small. Without her makeup, without her jewelry, without the arrogance that fueled her, she looked like a ghost. She didn't even look at me as they guided her into the back of the van. She was already gone, lost in the reality of what was coming. Then came Derek. He was shivering in his tropical shorts and a thin hoodie the police had draped over his shoulders. His hands were cuffed in front of him. He looked miserable, his nose red and running, his eyes scanning the ground as if looking for a way out. I stopped by the tailgate of my truck. I looked down at my left hand. The gold wedding band glinted in the sunlight. It was a simple band, one Mark and I had picked out together at a pawn shop near the base because we were young and broke. For years, I had looked at this ring and felt love. But lately, ever since Mark died and I was left alone with his family, the ring had started to feel heavy. It felt like a shackle linking me to the name Vance. It linked me to Sylvia's cruelty and Derek's greed. Mark wasn't in that ring. Mark was in my heart. Mark was in the memories of late-night drives and quiet mornings. This piece of metal, this was just a connection to the people who had dishonored him. I slid the ring off my finger. It left a pale band of skin where it had sat for 7 years. I held it up, letting the sun catch the gold one last time. "Hey, Derek," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the crisp morning air, it carried perfectly. He looked up, his eyes widening as he saw the gold between my fingers. "You wanted Mark's money so bad?" I asked. "You can have this." I flicked my wrist. The ring arched through the air, spinning in the sunlight, and landed with a soft plip in a snowbank near the edge of the driveway, right next to a patch of yellow slush. Derek's reaction was instinctive. It was pathetic. "No!" he gasped. He lunged. He actually lunged for it. He jerked away from the deputy, diving toward the snowbank, his cuffed hands reaching out desperately for the few $100s of gold buried in the ice. He slipped on the slick pavement and went down hard, face first into the snow, scrambling like a starving animal fighting for a scrap. "Get up," the deputy barked, hauling him up by the back of his hoodie. "Jesus, kid, have some dignity." Derek stood up, covered in snow, shaking. his eyes fixed on the spot where the ring had disappeared. He looked at me, and for a second I saw the realization hit him. He had traded his freedom, his family, and his future for nothing. He was going to prison, and he was doing it covered in mud, chasing fool's gold. I turned away. I didn't need to see him get loaded into the van. That part of my life was over. I climbed into the driver's seat of my truck and slammed the door. The cab was warm, the engine was humming a low, steady growl. I looked at my right hand. On my ring finger, I now wore a different ring. It was heavy, made of dull steel, with the eagle, globe, and anchor engraved on it. Arthur's Marine Corps service ring. It was too big for me, so I had wrapped the band in tape, just like soldiers do in the field. I rested my hand on the gear shift. I thought about the bank transfer I had scheduled with Catherine Ross just an hour ago. $3.2 million. It was a life-changing amount of money. It was enough to buy a mansion, a fleet of cars, to disappear to an island and never work again. But that wasn't who I was, and that wasn't who Arthur was. I had kept half, $1.6 million. Enough to ensure I never had to worry, enough to maybe start a small business or buy a cabin near a lake where I could fish and think. The other half, $1.6 million, was already gone. I had signed the paperwork to establish the Arthur and Mark Vance Memorial Fund. The money was going to the Wounded Warrior Project and the Fisher House Foundation. It would build ramps for disabled vets. It would pay for therapy for soldiers with PTSD. It would provide housing for families whose loved ones were recovering in military hospitals. Sylvia and Derek had tried to use Arthur's money to buy handbags and cruises. Now, that same money was going to save the lives of men and women who actually deserved it. It was the ultimate poetic justice. I put the truck in drive. "You ready, boys?" I asked, looking at the urn in the passenger seat and touching the photo of Mark on the dashboard. I pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching over the snow. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't look at the house. I didn't look at the police van. I turned onto the main road, heading west toward Route 30. The road ahead was plowed and salted, a strip of black asphalt cutting through the white landscape, leading toward the horizon. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." He was right. Sometimes it bends slowly. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it feels like it's breaking. But if you stand your ground, if you fight for what is right, eventually, it snaps back. I rolled down the window, letting the cold wind rush in, stinging my cheeks and filling my lungs. I took a deep breath. The nightmare was over. The winter was ending. "Mark, Arthur," I whispered to the wind. "Rest easy. You two can stand down now. I've got it from here." I pressed the gas pedal, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running. I was driving toward my life. Looking back at my journey, I realized the hardest pill to swallow wasn't the stolen money. It was the betrayal by the people I called family. I used to believe that family meant staying and enduring, no matter how toxic things got. But I learned the hard way that family is a title earned through love and care, not a right you're born with. Setting those boundaries wasn't an act of hate toward them. It was the highest form of self-respect for myself. I realized that if I kept opening the door for people who hurt me, I was just handing them the weapon. Walking away was the bravest thing I ever did to save my own life. Now, I want to turn this over to you. Have you ever felt trapped by a sense of duty to family members who only drain you? Or have you found the courage, like I did, to finally cut those ties and choose your own peace? Please scroll down and share your story in the comments. I read them, and I want to know I'm not alone in this. If seeing justice finally served gave you the relief you needed today, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's stick together and remind each other that we are strong enough to start over.